we can address any questions live.
Yes. So Josie, that was a question that we were discussing before you came on. There's going to be a question and answer at the end of this. Is that right?
Yes, if
Not
there's any
during.
question that comes in that's particularly relevant, like in the moment, I'll just throw it in, but we'll have time for Q&A. And we've got about an hour slated total.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't add up all the 5 and 3 minute things here to see how close we were
Sure.
just from that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hit go live in both places and we will be good.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program. We are going to give everybody another minute or so to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We've got still some folks trickling in, but we will go ahead and get started with tonight's program. So hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Josie Cooper, and I'm excited to be here with the Gout Support Group of America, as well as the Gout Education Society this evening for a conversation about gout. We know that this is a condition that can be hugely challenging for patients, and so we are here really to answer questions, to provide some guidance on kind of what we always call Gout 101. And really to just be a resource to everybody who is joining us tonight. So over the next hour or so, we'll cover gout basics, treatments, all of that, and we'll have plenty of time as well for Q&A. And so if you are joining us on the Zoom, you can drop any questions into the Q&A box. If you are on Facebook, drop that as a comment, and we will be sure to answer as many questions as possible tonight. So with that, I'd like to introduce or give our speakers a couple of minutes to introduce themselves. We're joined tonight by Dr. Chris Parker and Dr. Larry Edwards. So we'll let each of you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, and I'll start with you, Dr. Parker.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening in. It's a pleasure to be here. Basic background on me is I'm a community-based rheumatologist. Started practicing in the 1900s, so it's been a little while now. I got very interested in gout back then, and that really continued. I became the co-founder of the Gout Support Group of America with one of my patients about really a decade ago is when we started kind of working on this. Anyway, I had very bad gout, and once I got it fixed up, he really transformed to an amazing physical specimen. And he's like, man, you know how much false information and bad information is out there? Where's the gout support group? Where's the gout support group? I mean, there's breast cancer has one, diabetes has one, everybody's got one. There's no gout one, and there's people are trying to tell me to drink cherry juice and eat yams, and that's going to solve my problems. And I go, well, I don't really know of a support group. And so he's like, well, we need to make one. And we started working on it just to come to my clinic on Saturday mornings. And then it grew from that. I'm in Austin, Texas, to where we had to put it on the internet and on Facebook. And then that grew to hundreds and then thousands. And now we're somewhere between 15 and 20,000 people throughout the English speaking world. And it's been a joy to help patients from all over, because many patients, as Josie mentioned, struggle with this condition primarily because they oftentimes see physicians who don't really put this as a priority and just do kind of intermittent management instead of a real proactive approach to treat the problem. And they just struggle and struggle. And so we really try to have science-based, science-grounded, practical, pragmatic information for people who are struggling or loved ones who are struggling with the person they're caring for, and do it in an environment that is also, practical and pragmatic and designed to squelch fairy tale and folklore about gout and really get them to what the help they need.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dr. Parker. It's
Mhm.
always so encouraging to hear you share kind of the genesis of the Gout Support Group of America. Dr. Edwards, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, Jesse. I'm Larry Edwards. I'm a professor of medicine and a rheumatologist at the University of Florida. I've been working in uric acid metabolism and gout for the last 45 years, initially as a more basic scientist, and then in the past 30 plus years, mostly as in clinical studies and as they relate to gout. It's been a wonderful road. About 18 years ago, I and Dr. Ralph Schumacher, now deceased, but one of the giants of gout in this country, formed the Gout Education Society. And we did it because we had spent years out trying to educate physicians on how to treat gout, and we weren't really seeing the needle move very far as good care of gout was concerned in this country. So we thought that having a web-based good information, dispelling all the myths website would be helpful. And so we developed that, like I say, about 18 years ago. We dedicated a day of the year, May 22nd, as Gout Awareness Day. And we've been going ever since. We get about 10,000 unique hits to our website monthly. We send out about 4,000 newsletters to patients and health professionals each month. And it's been very good. Yeah, the big problem that we saw is the same that Gary just described. I'm sorry, that Chris just described, as far as what was out there on the websites at the time, and is just flooded. You'd have to get, if you looked up treatment of gout, you'd have to go 5 pages into Google before you found something that really was meaningful. And so our whole task is to try and lay out for the people that log on to us. And that's, we have both a patient and public side of the website and a professional one. Just talk about what the treatment guidelines are that have been accepted around the world. Also, what we noticed was that the biggest question that would come into our website had to do with, where can I find a physician that really cares about gout, that knows how to treat it, that doesn't dismiss me when I walk in and tell them that I have gout. And we didn't know. And so again, about 12 years ago, we started admitting physicians to our website that had an interest in gout and swore allegiance to the American College of Rheumatology's gout treatment guidelines. And then we listed them on our website. So we've grown that website from 100 or so people that were spread out across the country, which isn't a very good coverage, to about 850 rheumatologists now that tell us that they like to see gout, that they'd like to treat it in the way that's recommended by the professional organizations. And so that's where we stand today.
By the way, I have sworn allegiance to said membership.
Okay.
Just so we know.
So have
On
I.
the same team. And
Well,
I'll also say that I've also viewed Dr. Edwards as mentor and friend over the time I've been practicing. He's always been a source of information, particularly when I have my own difficult cases to reach out. So it's a thrill for me to be here with you, sir.
Yeah, my pleasure entirely.
it's a fantastic overview of both organizations, and appreciate everything that you both do. I'll just say to the patients on the line, there's a tremendous amount of expertise here in gout. And so truly drop your questions into the Q&A because we've got a lot of great resources to help get those answered. So Dr. Edwards, want to start with a question for you. So let's go very basic. What is gout? Can you just provide kind of a brief explanation here?
It could, but it'd probably be a little longer than that. It is, at its very core, the most common form of inflammatory arthritis in humans. It's it's 4 times more common than a disease like rheumatoid arthritis that you hear about all the time on the news, on the TV. And in fact, if you took most all the other forms of inflammatory arthritis and put them all together, they would almost equal the amount of people suffering from gout. And so inflammatory arthritis is simply means that there's joint pain and swelling and dysfunction in a joint that's caused by underlying inflammation. The thing about gout is that it's not just about the joints. People get in their minds that this is pain in the great toe and they stop there. Well, pain can occur in almost any of the joints, the further away from the core of the body. So your fingers, your wrist, your feet, your ankles, your knees, all elbows, all can be affected. And that has everything to do with the presence of uric acid in excess. And in certain locations, when you have excessive uric acid, they form crystals, and that happens in and around the joint. And this is the process that really triggers the inflammation. Gout is said to go through various stages where there's a great flare, this most painful of all conditions that humans suffer. And then there's a period we call the intercritical period, meaning that there isn't much happening. The patient might forget about it. They might say, well, I don't have gout anymore, but in fact they do. And we're learning more and more that gout isn't just a disease of flares. It's this in-between time where these proteins that are associated with inflammation are really quite present in high concentrations, and they're doing bad things to the body, like any kind of chronic inflammation. They're attributing to atherosclerosis of blood vessels. They're causing kidneys to function less well. They're causing people with hypertension, with high levels of cholesterol to be worse off. So it's not just an inflammatory arthritis. We say it's a bunch of things. It's a inflammatory disease that has a genetic basis to it that also has a metabolic basis. And in fact, when you have gout and you have diabetes and hypertension and hyperlipidemia and chronic kidney disease, these all make up the metabolic syndrome, and they should be looked at all together, and they should all be taken just as seriously as you would a heart attack.
Thanks so much, Dr. Edwards. So serious, not just the flare, and very, very common are kind of three of the big points I think I take from that. Dr. Parker, who gets gout? Are there lifestyle factors, family history, who's most susceptible here?
Yeah. Well, Dr. Edwards mentioned some of this stuff. I'm just going to amplify a couple things that he covered. So yes, there's a genetic relationship, and I come from one of those families where grandpa had it, dad has it, brothers had it, and I don't want it. So, I take proactive steps to not be in the club right out of the gate. So genetics is important. Yes, on lifestyle. So there are things that we can do with our lifestyle to increase our chances of this very common illness. And as Dr. Edwards says, that this condition runs with other metabolic derangements, as I say. So obesity, hyperlipidemia, meaning high cholesterol, high blood sugar, meaning diabetes. So these things run together. And so when people have, and one very, very important one is kidney problems. And so I like to tell my patients, listen, the kidneys are like the most important organ in the body to get rid of that uric acid, which is a normal waste product. So your kidneys have to get rid of that by about 2/3 approximately. But what if your kidneys are sick? Well, now you can join the club, even if you don't have that genetic equation in your background, right? And so there's lots of things that can get you into the club, I'll say, and those are some of the common ones, if you will.
Thanks so much, Dr. Parker. Dr. Edwards, could you talk a little bit about what treatments are available to people who have gout?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, there's a number of pharmaceutical agents that are used in treating gout. And we break them down into two columns, and it's important to stress this when we're first seeing patients and telling them about gout, that there's medications that we use to fight the inflammation that occurs during the flares. And then there's medications that we use to lower uric acid levels, and the high uric acid levels is what drives this whole process. And they shouldn't confuse them. Lots of times I'll have patients come in and say, you had me on allopurinol, but my doctor said, we'll just change that out for colchicine because these are two gout treating drugs. Well, they do entirely different things, and we need to make that absolutely clear. So for treating flares, the medications that we use actually have been around for more than half a century, much more than a half a century. So we use colchicine for crystalline arthritis in general, but gout in particular. We use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. That's the naproxen and the ibuprofen type of drugs. And we also use corticosteroids, sometimes in the form of Medrol or prednisone. And these are the most common. And because of various diseases, there's an art here of which one would be best for the patient. Somebody with diabetes, you certainly would want to stay away from the corticosteroids. Somebody with kidney disease, you'd want to stay away from the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. People with a lot of GI problems and GERD, reflux esophagitis, maybe stay away from the colchicine. But that's the kind of palette that you're choosing from, really. And you can use low doses of two of them. You can use non-steroidals in colchicine or steroids in colchicine sometimes if you can't go full dose. But those are the drugs we use. New on the market, and some used off-label, are the IL-1 inhibitors. IL-1 is an inflammatory protein that really is at the base of all the trouble and pain that a person feels during acute attack of gout. And we've had IL-1 inhibitors out on the market for over 25 years. They were initially brought out to treat rheumatoid arthritis. Aren't very good at that, but they are very good at stopping the inflammation of gout attack. And we have drugs like anakinra, and that's not approved by the FDA, but a longer acting form of it, canakinumab, just this past year had been approved for a treatment. So there's lots of things in our armament for treating gout. The more important thing than which of those drugs to use is when you use them. If you use them in the first few hours of the gout attack, most people with gout get a bit of an aura about this thing coming on and know when they're looking down the barrel of another attack. That's the time to treat it, because you can kind of derail the whole process if you start it early enough. And so we have a concept called a pill in the pocket. So whatever the patient and the physician agree on should be the right therapy for them and how much to take. They should have it with them always, because gout can present. It doesn't just present itself at 3 o'clock in the morning. It can present itself at any time. And so then it's important that they have it available to them. If they go on vacation, they take it with them. If they go to work, they have it somewhere around, and that way they can kind of, like I say, derail the process. The other side of the treatment coin is drugs that we use to lower uric acid. Allopurinol was first introduced back in 1965 and continues to be the medication that we go to first. That it's an important drug. It's been highly misused. That if you look at in the PDR, if you look in the information records about allopurinol, you'll see that it's approved in the United States for anywhere from 100 milligrams up to 800 milligrams. Only about 3% of prescriptions for allopurinol ever exceed 300 milligrams. And because of that, most patients on allopurinol are simply undertreated. They're not getting their uric acid to a target of less than 6, which is important. And so as long as allopurinol has been out, we still haven't convinced the professionals in professionals in medicine how to use the drug appropriately. There's an alternative to that called febuxostat that also lowers uric acid by blocking its formation. Other drugs go back even further than the allopurinol. Probenecid was a drug invented during World War II. It was found on the side to have a beneficial effect for uric acid by increasing the kidney's ability to excrete it. And then finally, the last drug is the newer one on the market, and that's an injectable drug that doesn't just help eliminate uric acid by flushing it in the urine or preventing its formation, but it actually goes in and breaks up uric acid, and that's called pegloticase. And we use this drug. It's an IV drug. It's given every 2 weeks in a doctor's office or an infusion center. But we use this drug for people with advanced disease that don't want to wait around 2, 3, 5, 6 years for their bad gout to get better, but are thinking that it would be worth their time and energy to take the drug for 6, 8 months and have the whole thing gone. So those are the drugs that we really are using right now for both lowering uric acid and treating the gout symptoms, Josie.
Thanks so much, Dr. Edwards. I think that's an extremely helpful overview. And one thing that I always find encouraging when we talk about gout treatments is just knowing there are so many, right? You know, there are options for treating your flare. There are options for treating your underlying disease, which if you're a patient, I think it's just encouraging to be aware of and to be on the lookout for. And I'll just flag that both organizations, the Gout Education Society, the Gout Support Group of America, have resources on medication options that you can find on the websites. We're happy to share that with folks after this call too, just so people have it in one place. So one kind of follow-up question that I want to turn it to you, Dr. Parker, but Dr. Edwards, when you talk about advanced disease, what, should a patient be looking for if they're going, I've had gout for a long time. Is it regular gout? Is it advanced gout? What would that kind of look like, I guess?
Want me to jump in on that one, Josie?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you wanted Dr. Edwards to jump in or me on that. I want to go back to one thing Dr. Edwards said that I love, and that is there's an art form there.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have to implement therapy for flare-ups or figure out a successful strategy to get all this uric acid that's accumulated out of somebody's body, there's an art form there. And really every patient has, they get their own cocktail. So it's a custom fit for everybody. And then with that in mind, as Dr. Edwards says, I got all these tools in my toolbox, but some patients, because of either other problems, as we say in medicine, comorbid diseases, say kidney problems or heart problems or other medical problems that they have, I'm carefully using medicines to get that uric acid under control. Dr. Edwards outlined the common pills, if you will. And if I'm still unsuccessful in spite of doing the best I can, that is where someone is deemed refractory or recalcitrant or bad enough to have to implement an IV therapy, right? So that in my mind is where that one fits in. Or as Dr. Edwards points out, if they have such an accumulation, it's going to take years and years to fix, then you go, the pills in my toolbox are just inadequate to do the job in an appropriate period of time.
Yeah.
We'll reach for that medicine. Is that what you were going after? Like, when do I use that? Let me make sure I covered that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Advanced disease is what would happen to most people with gout if they totally ignored it, that over the years and decades, as long as the uric acid level stays above the saturation point, of 7, they're forming crystals. They might not have caused trouble in that joint yet, but they're there, and it's just the presence of the crystals that start to cause some deterioration, and that's the advanced stage, or where you can look at X-rays and say, "Oof, this person's had gout for a long time," and they might say, "I've never had any pain in that joint." Well, you've got destruction in it already. So it's that type of end of the spectrum. It's a disease of neglect. Yeah.
Mhm. That's very helpful as you think about it from kind of the patient lens. So Dr. Parker, at the Gout Support Group of America, we talk a lot about proactive management of gout versus reactive management of gout. I know GSGA has done research into that, what that means for patients. Can you talk a little bit about that, why it's important to be proactive?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that because, as Dr. Edwards said, when he used the word neglect, I'm gonna amplify right there and go, well, it could be that the patient is neglecting to be proactive, meaning trying to get to the root cause, not just treat flares. But as Dr. Edwards also said, that I want to amplify, and that is sometimes it's not the patient's neglect, it's the doctors who are neglecting to give this the priority that it needs, and they don't implement what we say when we say proactive means medicines to get that uric acid, the underlying problem of being too high, under control, right? You'll never get to the root cause if you're just treating flare-ups. That's reactive. That's wait for flare-up and then turn the flare-up off and then try to go back to chronically having high uric acid, waiting for your next flare. That's a bad way to go. And so the research that's been done at the Gout Support Group of America that is just that what does that do to the rest of the patient's life besides destroying joints, right? And it turns out people worry a lot more. When's that next flare coming? Which holiday are we going to spoil this time? Right? And so it impacts their mental and emotional state, which doesn't help anything, right? And so we really want to get patients and doctors to not neglect treating the root cause. Because if you do it well, as Dr. Edwards points out, getting that uric acid literally in a place where you're not making those crystals anymore and dissolve all those crystals that you have, now there's nothing to flare up. That's the proactive approach that we're shooting for here. Speaking the same language as Dr. Edwards kind of spelled out.
Well said.
I love that. And I think you raise a good point too, Dr. Parker, about kind of the mental health toll that gout can have, particularly when you're reacting to flares versus kind of proactive management. And I think it's timely because right now May is Mental Health Month. And that's really a time to acknowledge, that the impact that mental health, conditions have on folks, all of that. I wonder if either of you could talk about, kind of what you've seen in your patients with the mental health components of this disease. I think
I'll let Dr. Edwards go, but I want to jump in on back to that word neglect, and then you can amplify, sir, because you certainly have a lot more experience with me, and I'd be interested in your thinking. But when patients read on the internet or they ask their friend who doesn't have gout, what they think I should do, a lot of times they'll immediately go, "Wow, those burgers and fries, all those other things, and it's all on." That amplifies the problem because then they beat themselves up. Like, well, I guess I earned this one. I'm not even going to go to the doctor. I'm just going to gut it out and try to, do better with my diet, as if you could be perfect ever. Like anybody, nobody's perfect, right? And so that's just feeding the negative machine in our mind about whose neglect is this, and you're suffering for it, right? That just it's a vicious circle, right? And so again, we try to get people out of that mindset and go, listen, there's nobody that's perfect. Nobody's going to never eat shrimp. I have some shrimp right here that are delicious, and I'm not going to say never eat them, right? So that's my thinking on the the mental health part and the negative feedback loop that keeps going on. I'd love to get your thoughts, Dr. Edwards.
Yeah, well, I think that there's, you know, gout for centuries and centuries and centuries have been thought to be a disease of overindulgence. You know, the blame was all focused on the patients.
Right.
You know, going back to the royalty of Europe, you know, this is how rich people had to suffer for their overuse of too much alcohol and too rich of food. And you know, the more we learned about gout, the more we dispelled those kind of myths that it's not a disease of overindulgence. It's a genetic disease. You inherit it, and coupled with things like obesity, et cetera, greatly increases the chances of getting gout. But it's you know, it's yeah. When I said neglect, it's not the patients for the most part. What's being neglected is the education of both physicians about what this disease is, because a lot of them still firmly believe that it's all about beer and red meat, and that's just simply not the case. You know that. You can trigger gout, certainly with overindulgence of some of these things, even Chris's shrimp. But
which
you know,
I'm going to eat, by
but
the
it's
way.
not the cause of gout, and eliminating them from the diet isn't going to do anything other than you know, make the patient angry. And so there's not much use in suggesting that to begin with. Taking the medications is good. So yeah, what we've learned over these last 50 years is that that gout has specific underpinnings that we have actually recognized for probably more than half of the patients with gout, where the genetic trouble lies. And it's just simple little very small changes within the DNA structure that make the pumps in the kidney that eliminate uric acid function less well, not stop, you know, but not as well. And so that's why you have a uric acid that's 8, 9, 10 instead of one that's 4, 5, or 6. It's not your lifestyle that's put you there, and changing your lifestyle, although we do recommend certain lifestyle changes because of the diseases that gout's associated with, like hyperlipidemia and heart disease and kidney disease, that you should be on a diet that's not eliminating all these fine things that we all love, like steak and shrimp and beer, but really focusing on a good, healthy Mediterranean type of diet, which everybody in this country should be on, not just people with gout. And that's what we would call a gout diet, is something that's healthy and nutritious and good for you, not big eliminations.
Well said.
Absolutely. And you know, one question that we get a lot, I don't know if it's popped up in the chat yet, is, you know, what if I just do diet? I know there's research on that. Dr. Parker, do you want to touch on that briefly? You know,
I'll jump in and let Dr. Edwards give the fine points on the research.
Yeah.
I have a very practical and pragmatic way to answer it. That will not work. That will not work. Whether there's science behind it or not, and there is, he's going to share that. But you cannot expect anybody, even if they could be really, really good with an austere diet, you're going to try that for forever as a long-term durable strategy. Forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. You know, it's like all of us, you know, if our plan involves us losing weight, then don't put money on the good outcome of that. We're just kind of bad as a species for doing that. But there have been a number of studies that have looked at weight loss and what effect that has on uric acid. And if you break it down into the studies where they shot for maybe you know, 5-7% body weight loss, so you know, they could generate, the uric acid does go down, but it's just a fraction of a milligram per deciliter, about 3 to 4 0.3 to 4 milligrams. And that's not going to correct anybody's uric acid to the point that they don't need to be on allopurinol or an alternative drug for that. Even if you go up to people that have had gastric staplings and various other things, and you look at then they've lost 65, 70 pounds. Yeah, they have a good 1.5 to sometimes 2 milligrams per deciliter drop in their uric acid level. That's a big price to pay for a savings of 2 to 3 milligrams, uric acid. In fact, very few people is that going to correct them and get them out of the uric acid excess mode that they're in and causing their gout. So yeah, I encourage people to try and get to a healthy weight, to eat a healthy diet, but the idea of them fixing their gout by doing these kind of lifestyle changes is, as Chris would say, nonsense, I guess.
That's right. Or even other words that we only say in Texas.
You don't want to go there.
Well, thank you both for that. I think that's really important for patients to hear because sometimes, in the Gout Support Group of America, sometimes we see comments where people say, I've been trying to do this with diet and I feel like I'm doing everything that I can and it's still not working. And, what am I doing wrong? And so I think it's helpful to hear from both of you that, you're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
You're doing things that are good, but gout's a disease that needs management. And so, I think it just underscores the fact that it's really important to see a healthcare provider, and one that, is trained in gout. So, Dr. Parker, can you talk a little bit about, we've talked about some of the issues that we hear about from patients or that we, see in the Facebook group, but can you talk a little bit about the issues that you see your patients facing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say that as you point out, one of the first things on people's mind is, what do I have to do to solve the problem? They immediately go to diet because of what Dr. Edwards said about lifestyle and going all the way back hundreds of years. Like that was the whole story. But he and I have both talked about the genetic relationship, and that doesn't change at all if you staple your stomach closed, right? The genetics are still there. And so once we get past that, I think the next obstacle that patients face is, okay, fine, have the best diet I can, as Dr. Edwards says, Mediterranean diet and all that kind of stuff. You have some control over that. The next thing we have to do is devise a strategy with medicine, one of the medicines or a combination of the medicines that Dr. Edwards outlined for success. What does that look like? Well, in my mind, pill in the pocket, as Dr. Edwards says, and believe it or not, a lot of doctors have some kind of worry or concern or consternation about that. They shouldn't. I say to patients, listen, a fire is a lot easier to put out before it's a bonfire. Put it out when you have, the campfire with a garden hose. That should be in your pocket right now. So they should always have that on standby, and then implementation of some type of uric acid strategy, a medicine that needs to become a ritual. Because my goal here is not hit and miss, take it when I need it, take it when I'm going to New Orleans for a party. That ain't it. It needs to be everyday life, right? And so I say, listen, if I ask you to take your medicine today, here's what I want you to say. I don't know. I don't really remember. I probably did because I take it when I brush my teeth. There's things I do just because I live on Earth. That's what I'm looking for. I don't even think about it. If you're down here, you're living on Earth, there's a couple things you need to do for success. If you're in the Gout Club, you got to take your medicine. And if you got these teeth and gums here, you're going to want to brush them. Okay. It's that easy. I don't really want to talk more about that. Oh, I'll do one more thing. And then, even if you're taking your medicine, as Dr. Edwards said earlier, only 3% of all prescriptions written for allopurinol are for more than 300 milligrams a day, even though, a lot of people are just big. They need a bigger dose of stuff. So if you're taking your medicine, but you and your doctor or healthcare provider are not checking your uric acid level to see where you're at, you still have no idea if you have it under control. So it needs to be all three of those things. Yes, lifestyle things are important for all diseases. Yes, you got to take your medicine, but even if you take your medicine, if you don't check your levels, you don't know. So you absolutely positively have to check and then act on the data. That's how I see it.
And so uric acid testing, important.
Blood
clearly.
tests.
Blood test, okay. How often should patients be getting, I think there's some recommendations, right?
There's recommendations, and I don't have a succinct way to say it. I'm sure Dr. Edwards does, because I'm just kind of more of a country rheumatologist. But I just go, listen, the sicker you are at the very beginning when I'm making changes, I'm checking a lot more frequently, right? So I'm probably checking every 2 to 4 weeks at the beginning until I really get the custom fit. But once the custom fit is achieved, and I know the exact dose that works for you, and we're navigating down the road, then I don't have to check that frequently. I'm only doing maybe a couple times a year, unless there's some other changes that are going on, right? So once you're in the, as I say, sweet spot, then I just check it periodically to make sure you stay in the sweet spot. Or here in Texas, everybody's got a gun, so I say it's a bullseye is what you're looking for, right? So we've got to get it in the bullseye and then stay there. So that could be at the beginning, monthly, and then later, once or twice a year.
Yeah, that's right. And that really conforms with what the American College of Rheumatology's guidelines are, that you need to be looking at the uric acid level very frequently while you're dose adjusting and escalating the allopurinol or febuxostat or whatever drugs they're on. But once you get to target, and that means now less than 6 milligrams per deciliter, that's a minimum target. You know, those of us that run gout clinics, I don't think I have a patient in that clinic that is above 5. So I really shoot for a lower level, and that's easy to attain. You just have to go up higher on these medications.
Right.
But you know, the important thing, and this I'll turn back on people with gout, just like most diabetics, when you walk in and ask what their A1C is, you know, they know that. You know, they know what their blood sugar is. They know what their most recent blood pressure was if they have hypertension, or what their cholesterol level is if they have problems with that. Gout patients should know what their uric acid level is, you know, and they should be upset with their physician if they're sitting there on 300 milligrams of allopurinol and their uric acid's still 7.5 or 8. They should go in and say, this isn't right. You know, I've heard that these guidelines say that I have to get my uric acid level down, and that you have a range on up to 800, 900 if you're in Europe. You know, to get this down, patients should know what their uric acid level is, because that's really a good barometer of how well they're being treated.
Well said.
What is it you always say, Dr. Parker? It's over 6.
You need a fix.
You need a fix. I think that's extremely helpful. And Dr. Edwards, I think you raise a good point too about kind of patients feeling like they can advocate for themselves. I think that, you know, it seems like in other diseases there's more of this self-advocacy, but is there anything that you would tell patients about, you know, how to advocate for themselves within kind of the healthcare system? I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's very important for every disease that patients learn as much as they can about it. The problem with gout, of course, is that they're coming up against a lot of misinformation, and they need to go to a reputable source like either one of the groups that we've been talking about this evening here. So yeah, it's very important. You know, I think that, you know, if we have good medications, I'll tell you that there's any number in the pipeline still of new things that are approaching different aspects of gout that we only learned about in the past 5 years, that this particular protein process and these cells are important. If we block that, maybe we'll block gout. all of that's good. And I'm always happy when a new drug gets added to the armamentarium of treating gout, but it's not all that necessary. I'd say 95% of gout patients can be treated with what we have on board right now. We just need to educate the patients better so that they can advocate for themselves. We need to treat physicians better so that they're not obstinate or dismissive. You know, that's
Yeah.
the two things that either, and you understand it a bit. Primary care physicians, a patient walks in, if they have heart disease and diabetes and kidney disease, these are scary diseases in the minds of the physicians and the patients, and they're going to spend their 15 or 20 minutes with the doctor talking about those things, and somewhere down on the list, oh, you have gout also, and maybe not even ask about it. If the patient's not complaining, I don't want to hear it, I'm going to get you in and out. But they have to make a point of it, especially with this new news that the intercritical periods of gout are even more destructive to the blood vessels, to the kidneys, to other things than when the flares occur. So it's not a matter that I'm only having a flare every 8 or 9 months. It's that this period in between is also an inflammatory period that needs to be quieted down. So yeah, just bringing information to your doctors is a real thing. I don't want people to get into fights over this, but but if they have if they can go onto one of our websites and come away with information and take it to their doctor, then maybe that doctor will flip and become good for all the rest of them. And I think that's how we do this in community.
I love that. And one of the questions that we got ahead of this event, but wanted to address here is maybe Dr. Parker, you can take this as, what happens if I feel like my doctor's not taking me seriously? My gout's not getting better, or I don't feel like they're one of the doctors like you all that, are really treating my gout very seriously. What advice do you have for a patient in that situation?
Well, again, this applies to things that are not gout as well, because what I tell patients is, listen, this has nothing to do with whether or not you like this doctor or you trust this doctor, because there's all this stuff about loyalty in there and all this kind of stuff. And I go, skip over that for a second. Remember, the reason you're here is to try to improve your health. So if your health is still not under control, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or gout or whatever, it's not unreasonable to go, you know what? I want someone else's opinion here. That's okay. And if that second opinion, a completely different set of eyes, comes up with the exact same thing that your guy says, that should give you confidence he's doing right, or she. If, however, it's completely different, you go on the website and find somebody who's dialed into gout, and they go, no, you got to plus up your medicine, as Dr. Edwards says, and get that uric acid, in that target. Right. And so now you have a choice. You can say, well, I can go to this. I'm going to take this guy's opinion or that guy's opinion, or get a tiebreaker. But now you're being proactive, that you can literally assess this stuff and go make good decisions. And if your first doctor has an open mind, as Dr. Edwards says, join the club of people who are really understanding this disease, then that doctor becomes better too. Everybody wins. Most importantly, you, because that's your health's important. Right. So don't think about loyalty. Don't think about whether you like them. Things aren't going well. Get some help.
Thanks, Dr. Parker. I think that's a very important message for really anyone who's a patient anywhere. So one of the questions we've got in the chat that I want to address, and Dr. Edwards, maybe you can take this one. So talk about Krystexxa a little. Is there an endpoint for being on the infusion? I've been taking it since December, but no, I can't be probably on it forever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not intended for a drug that would be needed forever, unlike allopurinol or febuxostat. What we're trying to do with pegloticase, that's the generic name for Krystexxa, is debulk the body. If you think of uric acid accumulating around joints and tendons, and you were able to look and see these clusters of uric acid. It would create quite a handful of material, and the idea is that with lowering uric acid down below 6, that you can start slowly at 6 and rapidly at 1, milligram per deciliter uric acid. You can start eliminating these crystals. So that's the beauty of Cristex, is that people that tolerate it and find it effective. And now with the new way of giving it, that's about 75% of people that take it are going to be able to stay on it for more than 6 months. And we generally think that somewhere in the 6 to 9 month range, if you can tolerate it, is the right duration for most patients. That's going to help them debulk all of these deposits of uric acid around the body, will help eliminate, and it's these uric acid crystals that are deposited around that are the triggers for the inflammation. And so once you get rid of them, the matches are gone, so you can't strike any more fires in the joint, is
Well said.
the way we kind of think about that. And it's and that's its use. But once you've been on that kind of uric acid lowering with Cristexa, that you're gonna need to go back on something that's going to keep your uric acid level down, because the same genetic problem that caused you to have elevated uric acid to begin with is still there, only it's reeled back 30, 40 years, to what your process was. And so you don't want to reaccumulate it. So going on a dose of allopurinol that would just prevent that from forming is a good thing.
And for the listener, I would say that don't get frustrated, because as Dr. Edwards says, you're going to take it to debulk, but not everybody shows up with the same amount of bulk, if you will. Our patients have been getting, horrible accumulations over decades. That's going to take a lot longer than somebody who got into the Gout Club 5 or 6 years ago, right? So everybody's different. So you kind of hang in there until you and your doctor feel like you've really got the house pretty clean or debulked, as it were. And if you have those knobs and things like that, I mean, sometimes you can literally watch them go away and like, okay, I can see how this is going. And if you don't have those, and you guys are estimating approximately how long you need to go.
Yeah. So those are called tophi, and if they're still visible tophi, then I would continue on it. That was an interesting part of the early studies that we did with pegloticase. Was we were only looking at three months of treatment, and you can't blind that kind of a study, because these tophi were already disappearing after the second, third infusion. So it's a very potent drug. It's been underutilized because we didn't understand that you needed to block the immune system from forming antibodies against that drug. But now that we do that, it's a very good drug for 70 to 80% of patients instead of 40%.
Fantastic. And on tophi, because we hear this question a lot, where can tophi show up?
Everywhere.
What do you say, Dr. Edwards?
Well, uric acid crystals, the crystal formation itself is improved the colder the site. So people ask, why the great toe? Well, it's the coldest joint of the body. Why the hands and fingers and wrists and elbows? They're very cold joints. Hips rarely occurs in the hips. Warm joint, it's close to the core of the body. Same thing with shoulders. But we have a new way, high tech, and it's great, good fun for my gout clinic, because we have good radiologists. But it's a dual energy CT scan that just looks at around the body for gout or for crystal formation. And we expected it to show up in the places that patients are symptomatic with it. So the knee, ankle, midfoot, toe, elbow, wrist, fingers. But it started showing up in most unusual places, around ribs, previous injuries, things that weren't joints, within the heart, for instance. They were finding gouty tophi. So they can occur in most any place, but certainly in peripheral joints, further away from the core body, the colder they are, the more likely they are. And especially previously injured joints. And females, it's a little different than in men. Men tend to develop these things, in their 50s and mostly in the feet and ankles and toes and knees. Women much later because they're protected by estrogen that helps eliminate uric acid from the body up and through menopause. And when they have it, a lot of times they'll have it in joints that have been previously affected by osteoarthritis, just degenerative arthritis. So they'll show up with tophi in the ends of their fingers or somewhere in their wrist. So it varies a little bit with gender.
Helpful. One other question in the chat. I know we're getting close to time, but allopurinol, can allopurinol damage your liver?
Not very frequently. Okay. It's the study that was done in South Korea just looked at toxicity. This is a recent study in 2021. But the incidence was about 0.6% of people that started on allopurinol have some evidence of liver injury. Their enzymes go up. It doesn't translate to serious liver disease, however. So no, the allopurinol it does have some potential significant problems with it. We now know that these people that react to allopurinol, it's also on a genetic basis, and sometimes your doctor will be asking you to get an HLA-B5801, which is actually one of the immune markers of our own body makeup. And if you have that, then you're much more susceptible to developing what's been called the allopurinol hypersensitivity syndrome. It's something we all worry about. It occurs about in 1 in every 800 or 900 people that take allopurinol, so not very common and more likely to occur in people of Southeast Asian origins and in African Americans, unfortunately. And so those are the people we tested for. But that's a severe reaction that we do tests for and worry about.
Very helpful, Dr. Edwards. Thank you. I know we're very close on time, but I do want to note just a couple of comments that came from GSGA group members in the chat that I found really encouraging. A patient who said, I went undiagnosed for 30 years. Since treatment began 18 months ago, I haven't had a flare for 5 months. So, undiagnosed a long time, getting treatment, seeing success. We had another patient who said, I got a new primary care doctor and she heard my long-term symptoms and she sent me to a rheumatologist and it's been life-changing. And so, I share those just because as a patient, I think it's really important to hear from other patients that you can do this and you can have success, and with the right clinician, you can effectively manage gout. So I like to always be able to end on a positive note, but with our last minute here, I wonder if both of you can just share, if there's 1 or 2 things you'd like folks to come away with after tonight's program, what would those be?
Okay, I'll go first, reiterating some of the stuff I said earlier. If you have gout, you absolutely positively have to take your medicine and check your labs, or you have no idea if it's under control. And as Josie mentioned earlier, I'm just going to reiterate, if that uric acid is over 6, you need a fix. You need it. And again, meds are the way to go. Don't try to solve this with 100% diet. It will not work. I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, and my take home message would be, stop the blame game. It's not your fault that you have this disease.
Yeah, well said.
Inheritance, there are environmental factors that make it worse, but you're not doing anything different than the guy sitting next to you that doesn't have gout. But accept that, you have the disease, it needs to be treated, and it needs to be treated well, and there isn't anything that you can do other than stick to the kind of pharmacology that we've been talking about all evening to get to the right place.
Fantastic. Thank you both for sharing your time, your expertise. I think this has been extremely helpful. I'll just note for our viewers that both organizations have, again, tremendous amounts of resources. We will share in a follow-up email all of what we've talked about. We'll share a link to the Gout Specialist Network, which can help you find a doctor if you don't already have one. But just want to say, again, to our speakers, thank you, but thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. We hope you found this helpful, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jesse.
everyone.
Thank you,
Have
Dr.
a great
Edwards.
night.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jesse.
Hey, pal.
Thank
Bye
you,
now.
everybody. Bye.